Okay, welcome everybody around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. I have a very interesting video for everybody today because this is epic find. Even by my own standards in general, this is epic find. Um, I've been teaching for a very long time because I personally believe by my own beliefs and according to the theology that I believe and the theodicy that I believe and that I explain in my systematic theology book. But more importantly, like the theodicy side of the theology, explaining the great deep mysteries to why we're here suffering and dying. Um, if we're born innocent, then why are we here suffering and dying against our will, and how it's not fair for Adam to be blamed for all of our suffering and dying and all of that, right? I've been talking and teaching on that for like 7 years on YouTube. And welcome, man. Good to see you. You're just the right person to see this video. Um, you'd appreciate it more than most others. So, and you're more familiar with what I've been talking about. So, long story short, this is like unveiling like some of the grand cosmic mysteries in a very simplified, like quick and easy takeout type version, but it is what it is. And welcome there as well. Excellent. So I've long said that it makes a lot more, and I'm watering this down to make it real simple and quick, right? Because I don't want to be here forever talking about this stuff. But long story short, I said it makes a lot more sense, and it makes God. My theory here gives God the most credit, and it relies on giving God the most credit. Okay, the most benefit of the doubt, making Him look the best. That's what my theory relies on. That's the most important thing. I don't usually stress that. That is the reason why, the theory is what it is. But according to my theory, which I believe all the scripture backs up, it's in my systematic theology. I have a chapter or two on it. But the reason why we're born here to suffer and die is because Earth is a prison planet. This is why we don't see God. Most of our prayers go unanswered because we're sinners. We're here because we're guilty, like prisoners in prison. And when you're in prison, you don't go to prison so that you can get benefits all the time, rub a magic lamp, and have a genie grant all your wishes. That's not what going to prison is for. Okay. And in those two chapters in my systematic theology, I have a lot of verses. There's quite astounding verses that pretty much 100% conclude that we are definitely living in essentially what we've always believed to be hell. So one of the greater cosmic revelations, just thrown out there for everybody real quick, is that the lake of fire appears to be based on, I cover this thoroughly in my systematic theology with all the verses on the page, the full breakdown and the reasoning, everything, right? It's sound. But based on all the uses of the term lake of fire is a term, but it's a metaphorical term for the prison worlds. Okay, now the prison worlds are comprised of the abyss, of Hades, the abyss, which is the worst of the worst. It's like a void. Then you have the Hades, which is talked about in the Bible in the New Testament. Lazarus and the wicked, the wealthy man went to the unrighteous guy. I'm not going to call him wicked, you know what I mean? But the unrighteous guy went to Hades. That's a place for spiritual imprisonment. Hades is also talked about in Revelations, right? And then we also have this planet. Now, most people living on this planet don't like to think about it being a prison planet. They think that's preposterous. Maybe I'm loopy, right? But at the end of the day, the theory makes the most sense, okay? The reason why we are born to suffer and die is not because God is unjust or he lacks the ability to do better or create a better world or all these other reasons everybody has struggled with for aeons. And it's not because of this get out of jail quick blame card, like, oh, we'll just blame Adam for everything. It's his fault. Even blaming Adam for stuff is ridiculous because it still makes God look bad. Like, God doesn't operate by all these silly parameters. Like, he's going to make every living thing on a planet suffer. Like, all the animals, like all the little baby animals that get thrown out of the nest or eaten by snakes and just crazy things, or like, a little baby bunny rabbit's jumping around having a nice happy bunny rabbit time, and then a big eagle comes down, grips it by its neck, takes it to its nest and rips it apart for its babies. You know what I mean? All this terrible stuff's happening in the world. And why is all this suffering and death happening when God made Eden to be without death for all living creatures and without carnivorism? So you have to ask yourself, why is all this happening? You can't just say it's because Adam and Eve ate a fruit. Give me a blinking break. If Adam had gone on a killing spree, killing everything, that would be more of a reason to start, making all this suffering or whatever. But I mean, like, all he did was eat a fruit. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what he did, big or small, because, the fact remains is all these other trillions, probably, or hundreds of billions of living creatures that have existed on this planet, all subject to suffering and mortality. And the great question is why? Couldn't God do better? Couldn't God just make a wonderful place and put us in there and let us enjoy it, which is what Eden was supposed to be, right? Why is it that it appears that everybody is suffering? What is the reason? Well, I can tell you, even theologically, scripturally, we should not be blaming Adam. All the verses, I'm not reading them all out here from my chapters, right? But all the verses that talk about blaming Adam and this and that there, or seem to be blaming Adam, I dissect them like a surgeon and show that's not even what they're actually saying. But I'm not going to get into that boring stuff for this video. But at the end of the day, you can all see that it's sheepish and ridiculous, childish and unrighteous, corrupt, dark, and evil to blame Adam for us suffering everything. And like I said, it's actually making God look bad because Adam is just Adam. God's the one who's making all these rules, right? So it's really you're making God look bad. Now, I give God the credit. I give God the benefit of the doubt that he's not going to make a whole planet for thousands of years, hundreds of billions of living things suffer and die in terrible ways continually every day, okay? And ignore 99% of their prayers most of the time, and we never see him. We never hear from him. I highly doubt that he's going to subject us all to this simply because of Adam and Eve, and that would not be righteous for God to do that, to make other people suffer for something that somebody else did. Like, what if one day you went out and robbed a bank, and then, oh, okay, the whole of this planet now is going to be condemned to mortality and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like the whole planet, all your creatures, everybody for 10,000 years are all going to suffer and die. We'll be like, well, what did we have to do with that guy who robbed the bank? You know what I mean? All Adam and Eve did was eat a fruit. So that's the point. The point is it's not fair, it's not just, and it's not righteous, and God wouldn't work like that. And the only thing that makes perfect sense in terms as a solution is what I've offered and been teaching for so long, which is that God did create us. And like I said, the scriptures back this up. God did create, my theory says is that God did create us in a perfect world. Okay, he creates everything in a perfect world that's wonderful, like the Eden. Okay, and as I've explained in Genesis, in chapter 1, there's one creation story. In chapter 2, there's a different creation story that is totally different order of days, events, everything is different. Okay, and Judaism has always, had their theories on why it's like this and like that there. At the end of the day, I think there's two creation stories. And this makes perfect sense because one is the greater, grander cosmic creation story of our who we were originally and where we were originally. And the next creation story is the one, like the analogy telling the story about Adam. So there could have very well been a first person named Adam and Eve, and there undeniably was a first person at some point. And I don't really care if their name was Bonaparte Cheddarton, okay, or if it was Adam and Eve. I really don't care. Bonaparte Cheddarton. Jeez. I was trying to think of the craziest name I could. That's definitely crazy. Bonaparte Cheddarton. But anyways, my point is there's two creation stories. One is going to be the grand cosmic one, and the other one is going to be the analogy about what happened to all of us. Okay, so in the grand cosmic scheme, we're created in an Edenic world. Okay, and then to each ourselves when we sin. I think it goes by family units and stuff, but I'm not getting into complexity here. But when we sin, at some point when we reach a threshold, just like in society today, when you do something to a certain level of badness, or if you just accumulate minor offenses to a point, you're going to be expelled or put in prison. Okay? And at this point here, we would have been taken from this first world, this wonderful Edenic planet and world, and we would have been taken from there and brought to here, to prison. Okay, this is what my theory is suggesting. Okay, now that means coming here, we would be born, therefore incarnate as mortals. Even if we are some form of the same looking physical creature up there, we weren't mortal, like bound to a death down here, right? Maybe we are mortal, but maybe we live tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, and we have access to the tree of life that sustains us perpetually. You know what I mean? Or maybe we're just straight up immortal, right? But in either case, we came from all that goodness because of our sin, and we are cast down here. Now, this is logical because by doing this, God has made a good place and kept it good. He keeps it clean. If something bad occurs in it that doesn't reform, doesn't change, he might give it a chance up there. Like I said, there's probably a threshold, a logical threshold. When you hit that threshold, God's like, nope, sorry, you got to go. Boom. And you get kicked out, you incarnate down here, and you get born. Okay? So the Adam and Eve, the undeniable first ones. So, like I've always said, the story that's there is at the same time a true story about a real first person, Adam and Eve. Okay? And also at the same time, it's an analogy for what happens to each of us. Okay? That's the easiest way to explain it. I think we come down in family groups. Trust me, I've thought about this for like 20 years. I've had a long time to stew this over, digest it, and perfect it, the understanding of what would make sense. And the only way it does make sense is through family units. And there might be a cutoff point, like from great grandfather to, I've tried extrapolating it like that. And it actually does make sense. But anyways, right? When we do get kicked out, we come down here, reincarnate, and we live as sons of men bound to mortality. So in that sense there, when we're born into this life of suffering and death, it's got nothing to do with Adam. It's because of our own sins. Now this makes sense. It makes God look fair. It makes God look just. He's created a wonderful place. He does a sensible thing, which is if he's creating new life, he's going to put it in a wonderful place. He's not going to create new life and put it in a bad place like this planet, subject to suffering and death and children being born deformed and into abusive households and this and that there. No, he'll create everything in a wonderful place that's wonderful. And if you abuse your place there, you get kicked out. Okay? And if you get kicked out, he's still kind enough to give you another place that's probably very similar to the greater former place. Okay, probably very similar. We probably even look very, very similar, right? We're all made in his image, but we're just programmed to die. Okay, we may not heal right away from injuries. Maybe we injure and get sick more easy down here. Whatever it might be, this is the prison world, full of suffering and death. And we're only going through this because we deserve it. So another logical point would be is that the threshold up there must be something like along the lines of the equivalent of one death. Because if you're coming down here to experience a death, that means whatever you did up there is deserving of a death. Now, again, I give God credit and think that he's not going to kick you out of heaven to come down here and suffer because he told a lie. There's going to be some degree of reasonability to this, right? And I think if there's minor offenses, they accumulate to a point, and God probably has rules on all of this that would make logical, perfect sense. I don't think he's tyrannical, but I think he's sensible, logical, and fair. So all of us down here being born into suffering and death, we do deserve it according to my reasoning, according to what I present as my theology. Okay? But it does make the most sense. It makes the most sense of all the mysteries that are out there, and it makes God look the best out of any other theological proposed framework. Okay? Any other framework that anybody has adopted over the millennia really does just make God look bad. Okay? To say that God is going to curse hundreds of billions of living creatures for thousands of years on a planet to suffer and die in terrible ways, all because two people committed a sin. It doesn't matter how big or bad that sin was, whatever. That's ridiculous. Okay? All the children being born in, with spinal conditions or with brain deformities and going through all this suffering. And you're telling me that all of this terrible suffering, and these are just some examples, right? How about all the animals that get eaten and farmed as produce and all these things that living creatures go through, and all of this is because two other people did something in their own lifetime, their own thing in their own time? That's not fair. Okay, but it would be fair if we're here for that reason. And all the great mysteries are answered by this. Okay, why don't we see God? Why doesn't he answer our prayers? Well, the Bible does tell us that God doesn't doesn't really answer the prayer of sinners. We know that he does, but he does say in places, and it's logical, right? If you're obedient, it'll be more likely that he'll answer your prayer or give you something if you ask him, right? If you're disobedient to him, it's common sense. Yeah, he's going to be far less likely to, right? Doesn't mean he'll never, ever do it, right? But yeah, it's the obvious, simple contrast. It's not rocket science. So all the great cosmic mysteries, like why we don't see him. Well, this is prison. Why would he come to prison? He's in the free society. God is up there in the wonderful place he created, doing what he wants in his own time. All the blessed ones, the angels, everybody else are all up there having their good time. Why would he come down to prison? Why would he need to? He's everywhere anyways, but why would he need to come and be in prison for any reason? To observe it? He doesn't need to go to prison to observe it. So that's why God's not here. But if we weren't here and if we were up there, we would be with God. Scripture confirms that. It says that the angels see God's face continually. Okay? There's a verse that says that. So when you're up there in the heavens with God, you will see him. That's why Jesus said the clean in heart will see God. That's why there's lots of verses that say the righteous, in its own words, each verse, to each their own. What they relay is that the righteous ones, the worthy ones, will go on and will see God. So, up in the heavens. So all of these things make perfect sense. And when he says, like, I hated Esau in the womb, Esau was wicked in the womb, wicked from the womb. The only thing that makes sense there is that Esau lived before and he was a negative person. Now, with this in scope, we have to understand something as well. Judaism believes in reincarnation. Okay, we're not talking about Hindu Eastern reincarnation where, it's a whole different ball game for them, and you just keep coming back in cycles perpetually on this planet. Like, no. But Hinduism is a little bit more complex than that, because the more righteous you are, you go to more righteous planets, and then you eventually go to a place that is like the biblical heaven where you don't die at all and you're with God type thing. So, but the biblical reincarnation isn't about there is a possibility that you will just stay here forever and ever, because according to the Bible, this mortal planet, immortality will end. Whereas in Hinduism, the mortal worlds go on forever, kind of like recycling bins for all the unworthy creatures. But keeping things biblical, when we say reincarnation, we're not talking about these Eastern versions, right? In some concepts, people have a reincarnation is that the world evolved from this like atheistic view of just evolution, in that we were just like the intelligences in these primordial creatures, and that over time, because consciousness doesn't get destroyed, it just passes one form to the other. This theory is interesting, be a cool movie, but like, no, it's kind of scary to think about. But biblically, it's not in the Bible, right? But I'm just saying, some people, when they think of reincarnation, they're thinking about all this type of stuff. That's not what I'm talking about here. Biblical reincarnation is different, right? So it's not that your consciousness has made its way and evolved all the way from like billions of years ago through all different life forms, and then you've earned your way to becoming a human. Some people think this, right? Like New Agers and stuff. And then when you've become, human, that's one of the highest life forms. And if you're good enough, you can go on higher. Like, we're not talking about that there. We're talking about God created us in a wonderful world. We disobeyed. He kicked us out. We're in prison. Boom. It's like that there. But it does leave open the possibility, and there are verses that do support this, that say that if God chooses, let's say you are a bad person, let's say you're a good or a bad person, and you did a certain level of crimes that you could not pay back in this lifetime, okay? God may, in his wisdom, give you a second chance. He might let you come back in a second life. Now, the way he works this and facilitates this, and to do with families and this and that there, that's God's calculus. Okay, I've thought about it before, and it's not impossible. It may involve that person having to wait 100 years, a couple hundred years, and so forth. But that's God's calculus. But it's not impossible. It's totally possible. That person could come back. Okay, and depending on the circumstances, it might not be that they're coming into a family that, like an accepting, loving family. Anyways, I don't get into too deep things that might upset some people, right? But if someone deserves a second chance, God is the judge. And if God says, oh, instead of sending you to the Hades, I'll let you come back here for a second chance life, God might do that. Who are we to say God can't do that? You know what I mean? So I believe it's possible that could happen. It's not to say that happens with everybody. It's due to each person's individual circumstances. But there are verses in the Bible that seem to confirm this, like Esau. God hated him from the womb. Why would God do that? If we're born in the womb, new creatures, innocent, like all, churches and everybody believe, then why would God hate Esau in the womb? It's pretty ridiculous. You know what I mean? And people say, oh, it's because he knew Esau would grow up to be bad. Esau didn't really do anything that bad. He was hungry one day and gave up his lot of land for a bowl of porridge. It might be ignorant, but he was also hungry. God created your body. It's your duty to your body to feed it. And if you're hungry, you're hungry, right? He prioritized his body, his temple of God. I'm just being unbiased here, right? He prioritized his temple of God. He was hungry and needed food. Yeah, it was pretty ignorant, one could say, to trade off his lot of land for that. But, it's not like God hated him for other things. It's a pretty silly reason to hate somebody. I'm not trying to disrespect God. My point is, God's not going to hate somebody in the womb if they are born a new innocent creature, because he knew in the future they were hungry for a bowl of porridge. He's not going to hate on that person in the womb like, oh, you nasty person. You were so hungry for that bowl of porridge that you gave up your land in the future. You little rotten person. God's not going to do that. God probably hated Esau in the womb because Esau lived in a prior life, he was bad. So when he was coming into this next life in the womb, God was looking at him thinking, okay, you naughty person, now here's a second chance, blah, 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 right? That makes more sense. It makes God look better. You know what I mean? So I'm sorry, but my theory makes more sense. But anyways, I got some awesome verses here. Let me shut up because I've been talking for too much, right? I always do that. But here are the verses. In John 17, this is what I read tonight that blew my mind away. I don't know how I didn't really notice this one before, but it literally confirms everything that I just said, right? And Jesus says this, right? So in John 17, we'll start from verse 9. It says, Jesus is praying to God, right? In verse 1, it says, these things spake Jesus, lifted up his eyes to the heaven and said, Father, the hour has come, glorify thy Son, that thy Son also may glorify thee. Okay? So he's making an important prayer to God, probably towards the end of his life. So anyways, in verse 9, it's still in that prayer. Jesus says, I ask in regard to them, the people, not in regard to the world do I ask, but in regard to those whom thou hast given to me, because thine they are. And all mine are thine, and thine are mine, and I've been glorified in them. Talking about the people. And no more am I in the world, and these are in the world, and I am come unto thee. Holy Father, keep them in thy name, whom thou hast given to me, that they may be one as we. So I'm just reading that for context, right? Nothing juicy so far, but here we go. It's getting towards it, right? And he says, when I was with them in the world, I was keeping them in thy name. Those whom thou hast given to me I did guard, and none of them was destroyed except the son of the destruction, whom would be Satan, that the writing may be fulfilled. And now unto thee I come, and these things I speak in the world, that they may have joy fulfilled in themselves. I have given to them thy word, and the world did hate them. Now, this is it. Start listening here, right? So this is what Jesus himself is saying, and it literally confirms everything I just said, right? He says, I have given to them thy word, and the world, the planet, the world did hate them because they are not of the world. When I read that, I was like, huh? That's in the Bible? I was like, what? Hold up, right? But he says, because they are not of the world, and I am not of the world. So let me just jump over to these other verses. Jesus told people, we all know Jesus came from the heavens and he incarnated here, right? Everybody knows that. But there's like 2 or 3 places where Jesus says he's not from this world, right? In John 8:23, he said to them, ye are from beneath, I am from above, ye are of this world, I am not of this world. John 18:36, Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my officer has struggled that it may not be delivered up to the Jews, but now my kingdom is not from hence. Right? So there's a few of those. There might even be a couple more, right? So we know that Jesus isn't from this world. He came from the heavens. He incarnated here. That's why they followed the star for when he was born and all that. He came from the heavens, right? And when he left here, he returned up to the heavens, like Jesus said. So there's a bunch of verses that talk about that, show that he came from up there and visited down here. Okay? But this is the little revelation here, because Jesus says, right, that the world hated us because we are not of the world, just like how Jesus is not of the world. That's what he says, right? Then he goes on, I do not ask that thou mayest take them out of the world, which will happen at the end of days, right? But this was a couple thousand years ago. So he's like, I do not ask that thou may take them out of the world, but that thou may keep them out of the evil. Of the world they are not, as I of the world am not. So that's the second time that he said that. Then he says, sanctify them in truth, thy word is truth. As thou didst send me to the world, I also did send them to the world. And for them I do sanctify myself, and they also themselves may be sanctified in truth. And not in regard to these alone do I ask, but also in regard to those who shall be believing through their word in me, that they all may be one as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they also in us may be one, that the world may believe that thou didst send me. And I, the glory that thou hast given to me, have given to them, that they may be one as we are one. So here, one thing, this is a verse which I was talking about in a video the other day, where Jesus talks about being one with God and will be one with God. Like, that doesn't make us God, right? Just how Jesus being one with God doesn't make him God. Jesus says in a few places that we'll be one with God. That's the whole point of, our path, what we're going to do. But being one with God doesn't mean that you are God, right? You're not part of a trinity or a quadrinity. You know what I mean? It's just you're one with God, like family. But anyways, the important thing is, so I wanted to read the end there because it ends with that interesting point of us becoming one with one with God. But the things relevant to what I'm talking about here, right? So Jesus says in a few places that we're not from this world. He says they are not of the world as I am not of this world. That is basically and blatantly telling you that we are from the heavens originally, which is exactly what I was talking about. Okay, and the fact that he repeats this twice concretes it in like a second witness. So we're definitely not from this world, and something took us here. But then he says in verse 18, Jesus, I was thinking when I read this, I'm like, did we just enter like a parallel dimension or did God change the Bible? Because I don't remember this being in the Bible. Like, I've read the Bible front to back tons of times. I don't recall seeing this, right? I remember things like this being said, but it's almost like the Bible's been changed. But it's crazy because it confirms everything, right? Where is it? So where Jesus said in verse 18, as thou didst send me to the world, I also did send them to the world. And we know Jesus is the firstborn of all creation, primordial Son of God. He helped create the world and all that, right? Was Jesus the one being, the mediator, the interceder, the heavenly high priest, the one in charge with the judge to send us here? In the very beginning, when we first came here? Like, that's what it appears to say, that Jesus sent us here. Like, what in the world am I reading, man? Like, did something change? Or like we in the Twilight Zone? Like, I can't believe this is in the Bible. But it actually confirms what I was teaching. So anyways, I got some other verses here from elsewhere that helps solidify all of this, right? So if you go to Hebrews 2:14, check this one out. You're gonna like this one. It says, seeing then, talking about Jesus, it says, seeing then that the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he, Jesus himself, also in like manner did take part of the same, that through death he might destroy him having the power of death, that is the devil. Now, that's a verse everybody knows, and I talk about it in my systematic theology, like what I'm going to say here, right? But that verse really does tell you what it blatantly tells you, which supports my theology, that Jesus incarnating to come down here, he was doing the same thing that we did, right? So you got how Jesus became sin, right? We hear these verses, Jesus became sin, he took on flesh and he became sin. Well, this verse says he did it like how we did. So that backs up my theory. I'm sorry, right? That like proves it, because if we were up there living a good life and then we did sin and then we were cast out for our sin down here, we took on flesh and we became sin. That's what this verse is saying, man. Like, you can't deny it. It says, seeing then the children are partaken. It says partaken of flesh and blood. That means like we went to it. You know what I mean? The children. It doesn't say we are created as flesh and blood. It says the children are partaken. That means it's part of that responsibility is on us, right? Because we partook in it, right? So the children have partaken of flesh and blood. He himself also in like manner. So that means he was following in our footsteps. And this is where it becomes like that sacrificial sense, like self-sacrifice, where he was, even though he didn't deserve to, he was righteous and didn't have to come down to the prison. He was like, oh no, I'm going to come down here to help them. He became like sin, took on flesh and blood like a sinner, being cast down to the prison, incarnated, coming out of a bloody womb like the prisoners do, right? Boom, there you go. Makes perfect sense, right? And that's what it says. So that's pretty cool. And I got some more verses to read as well. Ephesians 1:4 seems to back all this up. It says, according, or is it? Well, I'll read from verse 1:3. Blessed is the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who did bless us in every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places in Christ, according as he did choose us in him before the foundation of the world. So this is before the genesis of the planet, right? For our being holy and unblemished before him in love. Now, it depends how you read that verse there, but this could be an earthquake-inducing verse. It depends on punctuation and how you read it, right? But it could be saying one of two things, something more meager or something earth-shattering, right? It could just be talking about how, forget the waffling. Look, what it does say, I always waffle too much, right? It says that he chose us before the foundation of the world. That lends credence to the fact that we existed before the foundation of this planet. Okay, and what does the verse say? It says, for our, that means because our being holy and unblemished before him in love. That supports my theory. We're in a wonderful place as righteous beings, okay, before the foundation of this prison world was when we slipped up like Adam and Eve did. We are cast out like Adam and Eve were into this prison world, right? Pretty awesome verse. It depends on how you read it, right? The other one's a pretty clear cut. This one here depends on how you read it, right? But if you read it that way, that's earth shattering, right? But anyways, going on to the next. Oh, I read those. Let's close that down. Help speed up my computer. Close that one down. So I got two more verses to read. Now this one's interesting. In Philippians, or Philemon, I think it's Philippians. In Philippians 3:20, it says, for our citizenship is in the heavens, whence also a Savior we await, the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, our citizenship is in the heavens. Now, depends how you look at it. But this one's still very cool either way. You could, being a naysayer, be like, well, it just means that we're going to get citizenship when we go up there. Right? Or it could be, hey, we were up there before. We already have citizenship up there. Could go either way, right? If it goes, we had citizenship first, it's all fair enough to say that. Like I'm citizen of a certain country, right? I am because I'm from there, right? If we have citizenship up in the heavens and somebody makes that statement, it's all fair, fine and dandy, perfectly fair to say that, it's because we came from there, right? Right? Pretty cool. And then the next one here, Ephesians 3, 3:15, it says, of whom the whole family in the heavens and on earth is named. That's pretty cool. Family in the heavens. So we have citizenship in the heavens. We have family in the heavens, right? When you piece all the puzzle pieces together, boom, that's what I say right there, explaining 2 of my chapters in my theology, okay? So all the great cosmic mysteries that make God look bad, that we scratch our heads over, they're all answered by this great cosmic plan. It makes perfect sense. And I'll end on this note too. No, actually, no, I'll leave that part out. So, and there have been other, Judaism actually does, like I'm not unique in this presentation, but all of the things I discovered and worked out are uniquely my own hard work. Don't get me wrong. I didn't just like copy these ideas from people, but in Judaism, they reject Jesus and the New Testament. It's a whole different ballgame. But in Judaism, they believe something similar, that the people came from, I think it was the Gan Eden. It's an Edenic world, and that from sin, we are cast out to here. And Judaism believes in reincarnation anyway. So if you're bad and God decrees to come back a second time to pay off debt and whatever, a second chance, you might go through that, right? And there are verses that say that. There's verses from Isaiah that say, if you behead an ox, it's like you're beheading a man, right? Which, why would it say that? Oxes are not at the level of humans. Now, either God is saying that he loves oxen as much as people, which we would like to doubt, or that maybe some oxen out there are some bad people who had gotten punished and had to reincarnate as an oxen who may get sacrificed, right? And imagine if you're a really bad person back in these, tribal war times, going around, everybody's waving swords around, chopping everybody, right? It will be a fair way. God makes you come back as an animal that goes up to the altar, right? It'd be pretty interesting. But anyways, right? So Judaism does talk about how people came from this place. It's not old Judaism, but there's a group in Judaism that believe that, and it's basically along the lines of what I'm saying here, right? So makes perfect sense. Makes absolutely perfect sense. But anyways, I've talked enough. Take care, folks. God bless.